A reading from the book of Sirach. My child, conduct your affairs with humility, and you will be loved more than a giver of gifts. Humble yourself the more, the greater you are, and you will find favor with God. What is too sublime for you, seek not. Into things beyond your strength, search not. The mind of a sage appreciates proverbs, and an attentive ear is the joy of the wise. Water quenches a flaming fire, and alms atone for sins. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
A reading from the letter to the Hebrews. Brothers and sisters, you have not approached that which could be touched, and a blazing fire, and gloomy darkness, and storm, and a trumpet blast, and a voice speaking words such that those who heard begged, no more messages be further addressed to them. No, you have approached Mount Zion and the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, the countless angels in festal gathering, and the assembly of the firstborn enrolled in heaven, and God, the judge of all, and the spirits of the just made perfect, and Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and the sprinkled blood that speaks more eloquently than that of Abel. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. On a Sabbath, Jesus went to dine at the home of one of the leading Pharisees, and the people there were observing him carefully. He told a parable to those who had been invited, noticing how they were choosing the places of honor at the table. When you are invited by someone to a wedding banquet, do not recline at table in the place of honor. A more distinguished guest than you may have been invited by him, and the host who invited both of you may approach you and say, "Give your place to this man." And then you would proceed with embarrassment to take the lowest place. Rather, when you are invited, go and take the lowest place, so that when the host comes to you, he may say, "My friend, move up to a higher position." Then you will enjoy the esteem of your companions at the table, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Then he said to the host who invited him, "When you hold a lunch or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your wealthy neighbors, in case they may invite you back, and then you have repayment. Rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Blessed indeed will you be because of their inability to repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." The Gospel of the Lord. So I think I've only done it maybe 4 or 5 times in my life, which is probably 4 or 5 times more than the average human being has done it. And I did it like the 3rd time, the 4th time, 2 times ago. I thought, that's it. I will never make that mistake again in my life. And then I made it all over again in June. And so, hey, you make enough mistakes, you know you're going to make a few more. And the mistake is this. I'd been at a cousin's house. It was a really funny turn of events with cousins down in Monmouth County, and I was hanging out with some cousins one evening back in June, just to stop by to say hi, and then was going to this little dinner party at someone else's house, where it's a group of people that I knew from when I was working at the church down in Colts Neck at St. Mary's. I lived there when Judith was sick, 2 days a week. I'd be from there back and forth to Baltimore. So My cousins, just as I was leaving, were talking about one of their children who has a rotten sense of direction. And I just think that's one of those things where the Lord has actually given me a gift in that regard. I have a pretty good sense of direction. Most of the time, I can find my way from here to there and not need the GPS. And of course, given my demographic, I refuse to ask for directions from people around me, but I do pretty well. And so this conversation about how the kid is always getting lost, I thought, come on, what are you going to do about that? It wasn't a conversation that I really wanted to dive into. I mean, it was lovely, but I wasn't going to dive into it and really had big theories or challenge their theories or anything else. Said goodbye to them, went to the dinner party. It was pouring rain. I didn't know exactly where this house was. I knew it was in the same compound. Put on the GPS, go, and of the 4 couples who were there, the couple who was hosting this event had just moved just a few blocks away. And so I had never been to their house, but I knew it was near this other couple's house. So I leave my cousins, go to this place, not sure exactly which house it is, but it's the 3rd house on the left, so how hard could that be? Well, what's hard is if the GPS brought me in from the direction from which I usually do not come, so the left is the right and the right is the left. So I pull into the street, count down the 3rd house on the left, it's pouring rain, jump out of the car, there's a couple of cars in the driveway, barrel in through the garage, in through the laundry room, hey everybody! And there's a family having dinner with a little bit of a frightened look on their face. Hi, do we know you? Well, yeah, because I thought maybe they had a kids' table for this dinner party, something like that. So I started to pull out a chair and I said, well, not yet, but I think we will. And they're kind of looking at each other. I think, is this Daryl's house? Oh, no. Daryl's house is 2 doors down. Well, what do you know? I'm at the wrong dinner. What are you having? But I was out of there within 5 minutes. I got to promise you, I was gone within 5 minutes. The longest I've ever extended one of these blunders was just over an hour at a place in Baltimore where after an hour, the couple said to me, we're just wondering, were we planning for you to stop by? And I'm thinking, isn't this where the party is? No, wrong house. Okay, see you later. I'll go down to the neighbor's house. This is all done in 5 minutes, but let me tell you, that conversation of a little bit, 20 minutes before that, about people getting lost that didn't interest me at all of a sudden I had a whole new interest in how it is that people can go to the wrong joint when they know perfectly well where they're going, right? Something about that experience sparked my curiosity. How is it that people end up in the wrong house? And especially, how do people end up at the wrong table? By the way, it all came to a nice, clean finish. The husband came in as one of the kids is like backing off toward the telephone, ready to dial 911. And the husband said, aren't you that priest who left just after we got to St. Mary's? I said, yes, I am. And then everybody kind of breathed easy. But I had the neighbor call and say it really was who he said he was, and it was just an honest mistake. But the change in curiosity levels, right? At some point, it doesn't interest at all, and then it's like a major burning desire. You know how it is. You have different topics where it's not really something that you have a burning passion to learn more about, and then all of a sudden you're in it, and you do. Funny how curiosities come and go. And then there are those things called inspired curiosities, where we want to learn something, to know something, to master some effort, to become proficient in something, and we know it's inspired because if we do it, then it lines up with God's hopes, and the world can become more like Jesus Christ wants it to be, and we grow in faith and in hope and in charity. The readings today invite us to notice that gift of inspired curiosity and to be good stewards of inspired curiosity, and sometimes to notice, well, sometimes I have to try to be a little bit more curious and a little bit more available to the truth of this situation. Inspired curiosity. In the gospel today, start with the gospel rather than the first reading. In the gospel today, Jesus, in this 14th chapter of Luke's gospel, is giving us a lesson in humility. And he addresses it, it's 2 parts. Notice both of the sections of the gospel today are about a dinner party. At the first part, it's about what the guests should do, and in the second part, it's about what the host should do. And what should the guests do? The guests shouldn't covet the place of honor. If you go to a party like this, if you go to a gathering, you don't want to put on blinders and only want to sit next to the rock star, right? Like, that's a bad move. And not only is it a bad move in terms of humility, given the social structures, very carefully worked out choreography of ancient Middle East dinner parties, because sitting there means you're a bigger cheese than the other ones. But it also indicates that your lack of curiosity about the other people who are there. And so you've decided, by focusing only on the big cheese, the rock star in the gathering, that that's the person that matters the most. Well, how do you know it's the person that matters the most? Why do you have why do you have, why does anyone have any sense that the revelation that God wants to share with me through that person is somehow more valuable than the revelation that these others could share at the stern end of the table, right? God speaks through other people, so what's to make me think, why am I so curious about what this person has to say and do, and not at all curious about this? And Jesus is saying, you gotta be willing to sit there, subtext, you gotta be willing to have a conversation with them, rub elbows with them, let them influence you, let me speak to you through them as well. Don't put on blinders and just think that the rock star is the only one who has something to say. That's completely wrong. So sit where you're gonna sit and be available to the possibility that God wants to speak through whomever is near. There's the advice for the guests. Just don't get weird about putting on the blinders and wanting to sit there. There's all sorts of revelation to be had all around this table. Be available to it. Stay curious about every person at the table, not nosy. Maintain your inspired curiosity. And the suggestion for the host comes from the opposite direction. It's don't just invite the rock stars. Don't just invite the people who happen to be the big cheese in your community, the grand fromage, huh? You ninth graders will learn the meaning of that phrase in French this year, huh? Don't just invite the grand fromage. Invite the people, and he goes on to say, people who don't have a lot of money, and then he specifies 3 what we still call disabilities, right? Invite them. Again, the primary lesson is about humility. Don't try to prop yourself up to make yourself famous by the company you keep. That's weird. No, be available to revelation from all people. And remember, the poor, the people who couldn't see, and the people who had bad bones, and the people who couldn't hear, they were excluded from the priesthood, and they were considered to be sort of the unholy ones. And Jesus comes along and says, no, sit with them, invite them, have them to your party. They have a lot to teach you. Seriously? Seriously. Be curious about their stories as well, because their stories can teach you a lot about what I have to say. In the first reading, we get the reminder, okay, inspired curiosity doesn't mean we need to indulge every curiosity, and not every curiosity is inspired. Sometimes we want to know stuff that we just flat out shouldn't know, or we're going to obtain the knowledge in unholy ways. And so the two cautions in today's first reading from Sirach, remember Sirach is one of those 7 books of our Bible that's not in the Protestant Bible, okay? But the wisdom of Sirach, written in about 180 BC, written by an elderly guy who then he died, and the book was put on the shelf, and then his grandson comes along 2 generations later and has it published. And then it found its way into our Bible. But the 2 phrases there, don't seek what is too sublime, and don't be curious about things for which you don't have the strength. Because in the words of Jack Nicholson, sometimes we can't handle the truth, right? Sometimes there are truths that are too big for us to take in, or if we take them in, we will misuse them, or it's just not something that we should be thinking about. Example, 2 weeks ago when I told you about my little brother, the redheaded guy, the 7th kid, bombing around Polly's Pond in that Oppo with the big 18 horsepower, and what happens? He was burning with curiosity. How fast can that boat go? Jamie, that's one of those things that you're not going to learn in this life. Well, he was insistent on learning it, had to go out and check it out, bombs around, hits the wave, the motor of the day-old 18 horsepower goes in the bottom of the pond, and he goes into a state of complete horror, right? Jamie, maybe that wasn't a good idea. Like, you didn't need to indulge that curiosity. That one summer babysitter we had, who Peter had heard about these fancy drinks called daiquiris, and this lady was a bartender when she wasn't babysitting us. We didn't know that, I think, at the time. But Peter learned at 10 years old how to make daiquiris and martinis. Maybe that's something that's too sublime for a 10-year-old. Hey, you guys, check out what I can do, right? No, that's not something we need a 10-year-old to do. So there are limits. Think about horrible, horrible moments of Nazi experimentation that you shouldn't, that it's beyond abominable that they tried to learn the things they learned about human nature and physical structures doing what they did. Think about the Tuskegee experiments, big plot on American history. No, there are some things where the curiosities, no, we're not going to learn that. We don't want, that's not good for us to know. We can't get to it without hurting someone. And so, yes, there are limits on our curiosities and what's inspired and what's not. So I want to put the question out to the people who are going back to school this year about the subjects you love most, the things that you really are eager to learn that you can't wait to get back to on Wednesday or Thursday or whenever you're going back and think, this is a subject about which I really care. I would read this even if it weren't assigned. I would take a career in this even if they didn't pay me. Well, maybe not that extreme, but you get the idea. Things that you learn just because they're cool. That's where you have what we call spontaneous, automatic, inspired curiosity. And yeah, as a Christian student, the Lord is saying, use that well, because the insights and the knowledge that you gain there and the discipline of thinking in that discipline, you can use that to make the world the way I want it to be. You can use that to build up faith and hope and charity in the world. And it might not be obvious how you're going to do it, but you can, so go with it. Notice those places, students, where you really are kind of raring to go and you're anxious to learn. That's inspired curiosity. But I also ask you to notice those places where you don't get too revved up about it, where you think, oh boy, do I really have to do this? And the answer is, yeah, you do. So do it, right? And give it the benefit of the doubt. My biggest story about not giving the discipline the benefit of the doubt was I completed a master's in economics before I went into the Jesuits, and then after 2 years I got switched over and had to do a master's in philosophy. And I was like, all in my head game was all about economics, not about philosophy. And I thought, this stuff is this is torture. Why does anybody have to know this? What's going to, blah, blah, blah. The usual things that we say when we're small-minded and not curious. Then one of the professors, a wonderful fellow, lowered the boom on me as I was griping about it. And it changed everything. And I realized I've been a jerk about this. It was getting the grades. That wasn't the point. But the point was I wasn't curious about it. And after he lowered the boom, I got curious. And I got to tell you, I loved it. So students, where's that place maybe where you got to give it the benefit of the doubt? If you're not all revved up about it, still to give it the benefit of the doubt and try to pump up your curiosity, right? To think there's got to be something underneath here. They wouldn't be teaching this all these years if there were nothing to it. There is something to it. So students, where is your spontaneous, inspired curiosity? And where do you have to work on it a little bit? You can't love everything. I get it. But God's asking you to be students at this period in your life. So we cooperate with God and use well the inspired curiosity that comes naturally and work on it where it doesn't. And finally, everybody else who's not going back to school, I would just ask you to notice a story. If you had to tell a story to one of the kids who is going back to school, where something was just completely uninteresting to you and then something happened. Could be a person, could be a situation, could be a job, could be a ministry, could be a neighborhood involvement, could be anything where you were like, who cares? And then the switch got flipped and you were curious and you indulged it and it did bring you peace and it was a source of consolation. What's your story about going from who cares to, wow, this is cool? And it's something I can see ultimately God's giving me peace with this pursuit. Inspired curiosity. Students, where do you have it naturally? Where do you need to work on it? The rest of us, when have you gone from who cares to this is great? And felt peace and knew it was from God. And I will admit, finally, for the first time, my sense of direction is not quite as good as God's. So what would have happened if Moses hadn't gone to check out that burning bush, right? Right? His curiosity led him to the burning bush. That was inspired curiosity. What about if Andrew hadn't said to Peter, you got to come and meet this guy? And Peter hadn't been curious about what's Andrew talking about? What about if Paul hadn't said to Barnabas, come out, and Barnabas said, well, let me check it out, man. Curiosity, inspired curiosity, renews the face of the earth then and now. You and all the saints. So students, where's that inspired curiosity already easy to access? Your favorite subject, God bless you, the stuff where you just can't wait to get to it. What about those subjects where you think, oh boy, do I really have to do this? Yeah, do it, learn it, give it the benefit of the doubt. Pump up the inspired curiosity. And if you're not going back to school, where have you had that experience where you didn't care about these people or that subject or this place or that method, and now you do, and it's a great source of peace and light for you? What would be the story you would tell the kids who are really trying to if they're having a hard time getting excited about some certain thing, where you've gone through a conversion process and realized this is incredibly cool? Enjoy Monday, and I think most kids don't go back to school until Wednesday or Thursday. I start Wednesday. Can't wait. Let us pray.